we must learn to become indifferent to indifferent things. This comes to us from Marcus Aurelius. And it is a cornerstone of Stoic philosophy to be indifferent to externals, to things that are indifferent. Now, the Stoics believed that all externals, all things outside of our control, things that happen to good and bad people alike, must be neither good nor bad. Every external is indifferent. Life and death is indifferent. Poverty and wealth is indifferent. Health and sickness is indifferent. Because the Stoic would say that this is all outside of you. This is all outside of your immediate control. You can't control if you get sick. You can't control if you're in poverty. You know, there's some aspects, but ultimately it is outside of your control. You can do everything right and still end up in poverty. Cato, I believe it was Cato, has a metaphor for this, and it's with about an archer, and you know the archer aims his bow, and he can aim it perfectly at the spot. You know, he can do everything right, but once he lets go of the bow, and the arrow leaves his fingertips, then it is no longer in his control. You know, wind could come out of nowhere mid-flight of the arrow. The target he is aiming at can move. So therefore, after the arrow leaves his hands, or the bow, there's nothing he can do. Therefore, he is indifferent to the outcome. Now, that can be a hard pill to swallow when you realize the Stoics say things like life and death are indifferent. But the Stoics thought of all the critiques, and I believe they have an answer for all of their critiques. And the answer to that, and the answer to externals being indifferent, is that you're still allowed to have preferences. You know, the Stoic would say you should prefer life to death. You should prefer health to sickness. You should prefer wealth to poverty. But the Stoic would say that whichever you have is okay. But we have preferences, and it's impossible to get rid of these preferences. You know, you cannot, you know, say you were given two options of a drink, and it's not in your control which one you have. So you try to trick yourself into thinking that, you know, I like both of them equally. When in reality, you like one more than the other. You shouldn't lie to yourself in that way. You should say, I prefer to have this one, but if I get that one, it doesn't really matter. You know, it's not good, it's not bad, it's outside of my control. I'm indifferent to it. But I would prefer this. And that's what the Stoics say. They say prefer life to death, prefer wealth to poverty, prefer these things, prefer what you prefer. But the second it starts inhibiting you in making wise, virtuous decisions, then it's a vice, because you're valuing externals over virtue and wisdom. And that's what the Stoics value more than all. That is all the Stoics value, is virtue and wisdom, and living in a life in accordance with nature. And they believe a life in accordance with nature is virtuous and wise. So a cornerstone, as I said, of their teaching is to view indifferent things as indifferent. And when you say that, you're like, obviously, indifferent things are indifferent, but how few of us view them in that way. So many people worry about the future, but the future is indifferent because the future is not in our control. You can prepare yourself the best you can for the future, but ultimately it is outside of your control. Therefore, you should not worry about it. And you should trust that you will meet the future with the same virtues and qualities that you meet this present moment with. And if you've cultivated good qualities, good virtue, and wisdom, then you should have faith that in the future, you will make the best decision with the information you are provided. So I believe everyone's life could be so much better if we cultivated stoic indifference, if we learned to be indifferent to indifferent things, opinions of other people outside of our control, neither good or bad. There's a poem called If, and in that poem, there's a line that I've heard in many different schools of philosophy, religions, but it basically goes across the line as if you can become, or if you can view like difficulty and triumph as, and meet these two imposters the same. No, I definitely butchered that. But it's saying if you can meet triumph and disaster the same, these two imposters, because they are neither good nor bad. To be lifted up is not good, and to be dropped down is not bad. These are external things. These are not within our control. All you can do is what is best for you to do, and then however the world reacts to that is however the world reacts to that. It is not within your control. Therefore, it isn't indifferent. But an indifferent happening to you and you losing your virtue or your wisdom because of it, that is where the Stoics say you have suffered great wrong and you suffered it from your own doing. You brought it upon yourself because it was within your control. To become sick is not in your control, but to whine and to curse the heavens for being sick, that is your control. That is in your control, and that is not a noble way to bear sickness. The noble way to bear sickness is not to complain, to accept fate, to say amor fati, say you love your fate and bear it nobly. And if you can do that, a misfortune can turn into a great good fortune. Marcus Aurelius also tells us that. If you can learn to become indifferent to the things that make no difference, then you won't sacrifice your virtue in the thought that something bad has befallen you. You won't lose your virtue because you think you're being treated unjustly. Because you will realize that this isn't indifferent. Things are not good nor bad. Thinking makes them so. I think Mark Twain says that. And then we also have Epictetus saying, what does he say? I'm blanking on what he says. But it's more or less along the lines that, it's not things that upset us, but our judgments of them. it's clear when you view it philosophically that externals are neither good nor bad. It's just our judgments. Because something could happen to me, or a situation, something could happen, and it could affect me, and it affects you, and I'm happy. I'm happy this situation happened, and you're sad. It's the same exact situation, but we both have two different opinions. So what does that say about the situation? It means it's up for interpretation. It wasn't good or bad. It depends on how you view it. It depends on how you decide to bear the situation. If it was truly good or truly bad, then everyone would have the same opinion about it. If death, the Stoics would say, is truly a bad thing, then Socrates would have feared it. I think Epictetus says that. But Socrates did not fear death. Socrates welcomed death. Therefore, it can't be a bad thing. Because if it was a bad thing, everyone would view it the same. Everybody would view it the same. And if it was truly a good thing, say life, then everyone would view it the same. But it's clear that not everyone views life as a good. Nowadays people say that they don't even want to bring kids into the world because they don't want to bring them into this horrible world. And, they're mad that they were born and, so on and so forth. So if it was truly a good thing, everyone would view it as a good, but they don't. But they don't. So these are the things we need to learn to become indifferent to. Things that are not subject to will, things that cannot be changed. The past, the future, the present is the only thing. And it's not externals in the present, it's the internals. How you decide to view situations, to remind yourself that this situation, this thing that is happening to me is neither good nor bad. My thinking is making it so. The judgments I am having about this situation is what is making it bearable or unbearable. And the Stoics and the Bible say that nothing will ever happen to you that is unbearable. The Bible says that. God says that he'll never make you go through something that you cannot bear. And the Stoics say that if you're either, as you're saying you can't bear something, you're actively bearing it. People say, oh, I can't bear this anymore. But as they are saying, I can't bear this anymore, they are bearing it. So obviously that's not true. And the Stoics would say, everything that's ever happened to you, right now, I don't feel any pain. I'm a little sore from the gym and all that stuff, but I don't feel pain. I'm not super sore. I'm not injured, but I've been injured before. And the Stoics, would say that this too shall pass. I've been very cold before. That passed. I'm not cold right now. I've been very hot before. That's passed. I'm not hot right now. So therefore, everything that has ever happened to me has never lasted. So therefore, everything that's ever happened to me was endurable. I could have endured it. The Stoics would say the only thing that is unendurable will come with its own end. Meaning, if it's truly unendurable, you will die. And, it'll come with its own end. But if it's endurable, then you won't die. And you have the ability, you've been given, the Stoics would say, what virtue have I been given to combat this situation? And they would say endurance for that instance. You've been given endurance. You can endure this. I think nowadays we have to, in in a world so soft and where everything is so comfortable and so easy, and there isn't really hardship always, and sometimes, but rarely. We need to do hard things because they are hard. Give in to hardship willingly. As the cynics would say. That's why I think it's very good, and it's why things like cold showers or cold plunges, saunas, things of that nature are becoming popular nowadays because it's good for the body. I mean, there's scientific, evidence, but I think the mental state is what's better. Doing hard things because it's hard, because things are too comfortable nowadays. Sometimes you have to, it's cold out, and you got to say, you know what, I'm not going to wear a hoodie today. I'm just going to wear a t-shirt. It's going to get cold, but I can endure it. I can last. And you'll notice if you stick to it, you can. You're not going to die. Obviously do everything, somewhat safely. Um, you got to push your limits, but I mean, if it's like 0 degrees out and you're going to get frostbite, you probably should put on some layers. But, if it's like 40 degrees out and you running for blankets and your hoodies, it's like, no, just endure this for a little bit. You can. You can endure it. And this will strengthen your mind, and you will tell your body who's in charge. You need to view, because the Stoics would say also that pain is indifferent. And you need to view pain as, say my hand hurts. My brain just perceives it. It's just a sensation. You just feel the sensation, but your brain is not impeded. Your brain's not actually in pain. It's just your hand that's in pain. So don't make it out to be more than it is and think that your whole being is in pain. Separate yourself from it. Separate your mind from your body and say, my pain is here, but my brain is fine. It's just I'm just perceiving this sensation in my head. We can bear a lot more than we think, and if we can cultivate stoic indifference, I believe we can bear more easily. I think so much anxiety and so much worry and distress nowadays comes from people not being indifferent to things outside of their control. As I said, it's okay to prefer, but when you start losing virtue and losing wisdom because you're not getting what you prefer, that is where the Stoics say you took a wrong step. You can prefer not to do this, but if the opposite happens, then you have to bear that nobly. And then bearing that nobly, that's the good in the situation. The good in the situation isn't what happened to you. It's how you decided to handle it, what virtue you decided to show instead of what vice you could have shown. That's what the Stoics would say. And I must agree. Marcus Aurelius had a tough life, and in meditations, he never allows himself to complain. There's one line where he says, it's been a while since I've read it, but he says something along the lines of, it's unfortunate that this has happened. And then, dot, dot, dot. No. It is fortunate that this has happened to you and you have bared it nobly. This could have happened to somebody else and they wouldn't have bared it nobly. So it's a great good fortune that has happened to you and you handled the situation wisely with virtue. Because not all could have, not all would have. So he doesn't even allow himself that. And I think if you enjoy meditations, like I enjoy meditations, and you've read Meditations, the example Marcus Aurelius sets can feel daunting, can feel impossible to live up to. But I think it's very important to remember that this was, I think it's dated that he wrote that, in his late 40s to early 50s when he started writing Meditations. So that is a lifetime of wisdom and virtue and stoic training and rhetoric and, all these trainings that Marcus has gone through to become this type of person. So I think we need to remember that we have time to become as Marcus was. Because Marcus has letters with his old rhetoric teacher, Fronto. And, Fronto he was a rhetoric teacher. He wasn't a Stoic philosopher, but he was one of Marcus's teachers. And they had a decent relationship. And there's been letters found between the two. And in these letters, I'm pretty sure it's thought that Marcus is, around 30. And, Fronto is complaining about pain that he's going through, complaining about things. And then Marcus's letters in return is complaining as well. A man who in his private journals at 50 never allowed himself to complain was publicly complaining, or was, I guess, privately, but was complaining through letters to another person. But he wouldn't even allow himself to complain in a private journal, say 15 years later. So there is growth that can happen. And just because you're not there yet doesn't mean you'll never get there. And Marcus realized that the wise man does not complain. The wise man never complains about his fate. The wise man bears it nobly. And the wise man doesn't complain about his fate because it's indifferent. It is outside of his control. But he worries about what's inside of his control. And bearing it nobly can become a great good fortune. So that's what people like Marcus, Epictetus, and other Stoic philosophers aimed at. Learn to become indifferent to things that make no difference.